Welcome to a new episode of the Genius Program. On October 10, 2024. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te announced in his National Day speech that Taiwan does not submit to China and that China does not represent Taiwan in any way. With those words, he satisfied his conscience and the conscience of the nation. 4 days later, on Monday, October 14th, China launched a massive military exercise. What were they doing? Practicing how to blockade the island of Taiwan. To give you an idea, 90 aircraft entered Taiwanese airspace, and 125 aerial sorties were conducted, involving helicopters and drones. Not to mention the naval attack, 17 warships surrounded the Taiwanese island. This maneuver is now known as Joint Sword 2024. Interestingly, 4 months prior, in April 2024, there was an almost identical exercise called Joint Sword 2024. That exercise took place right after the Taiwanese president was inaugurated. The goal of these drills? To make Taiwan feel threatened. The Chinese military spokesperson made it clear. Joint sword means that a sword is hanging over the head of any Taiwanese who dares to seek independence. If you seek independence, you will be cut down. At this point, you might be wondering, why should I care? I live in the Middle East. This war is happening in a faraway corner of Asia. Let me tell you, my friend, this is not just a regional issue, it's a global one. President Biden has stated 4 times during his term that if China invades Taiwan, the US will intervene militarily. Biden personally emphasized this statement on 4 separate occasions. Was he just reinforcing the point, or did he slip up? Who knows? But after what has happened, if the US does intervene, we could see a real war, not a Cold War, but an actual war between the world's 2 largest economies, both of which have nuclear weapons. The situation has escalated to the point where US General Mike Minihan, head of the Air Mobility Command, which includes 50,000 personnel and 500 aircraft, sent a memo to his officers telling them to prepare for war in 2025. His reasoning? That year would be the perfect time for the Chinese president to attack Taiwan because the US and Taiwan would be distracted by their respective presidential elections. Some American generals believe that China could enter a war with the US this year. However, not everyone agrees with this prediction. Some believe the timeline might extend to 2027. Why 2027 specifically? Because that year marks the 100th anniversary of the founding of the People's Liberation Army of China. Some speculate that the Chinese leadership might want to align their military ambitions with this centennial. Imagine if leaders really think like that. Let's conquer Taiwan to round off the 100th anniversary. At this point, you might be thinking, wait, is this heading toward World War III? Maybe. But let's take a step back and look at how we got here. The US-China-Taiwan conflict did not appear overnight. It has been simmering for over 70 years. What's alarming now is that the US is shifting away from its long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity, a policy of deliberate uncertainty about how it would respond to a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. Today, America is playing with open cards, clearly stating, if China invades Taiwan, the US will go to war against the Chinese, without hesitation. But here's a surprising twist. Officially, the US and China have the same stance on Taiwan. Yes, the same stance. For example, the US does not recognize the Taiwanese government. That's right, the country that is ready to go to war to defend Taiwan does not officially acknowledge Taiwan as an independent nation. The US only recognizes one China, the China governed by Xi Jinping. In fact, only 12 countries in the world officially recognize Taiwan as an independent state, and they are mostly small, politically weak nations like Guatemala and Haiti. The vast majority of the world, including the US, does not recognize Taiwan's independence. Yet, paradoxically, Taiwan's security and economic prosperity have depended for decades on American and Western support, even though those same nations do not officially recognize it. It's a bizarre geopolitical situation, much like a father who praises his son's skills but refuses to acknowledge him as his legitimate child. This strategic ambiguity has allowed the US to maintain one of its most complex international relationships, its relationship with China. To fully understand the complexities of this issue, we need to go back in history. From a Chinese perspective, Taiwan has been part of China since the 2nd century AD, when an imperial Chinese expedition successfully annexed the island. However, Western historical sources tell a different story, placing the first significant Chinese migration to Taiwan in the 17th century, when Chinese laborers arrived to work alongside the island's indigenous people under Dutch colonial rule. Taiwan's history took a dramatic turn between 1839 and 1949, what the Chinese call the century of humiliation. During this period, China was weak and fragmented, and in 1895, it lost Taiwan to Japan. Japanese rule, as expected, was a humiliation for China. But paradoxically, for Taiwan, it was an era of modernization. Japan transformed Taiwan into a well-developed, industrialized society with infrastructure like modern sanitation, railways, and economic institutions. For a time, Taiwan was the second most developed place in Asia, after Japan itself. However, everything changed after World War II. Following Japan's defeat, Taiwan was returned to China under the Cairo Declaration. The island came under the rule of Chiang Kai-shek, leader of the Chinese Nationalist Party, Kuomintang. But his government treated the Taiwanese people as second-class citizens, viewing them as sympathizers of the Japanese enemy. This led to brutal oppression, culminating in the February 28, 1947 uprising, where thousands of Taiwanese intellectuals and elites were executed or imprisoned. In 1949, history took another sharp turn. Mao Zedong's communist forces took control of mainland China, founding the People's Republic of China. Chiang Kai-shek and about 2 million of his followers fled to Taiwan, turning the island into their last stronghold. Mao planned to invade Taiwan, but the outbreak of the Korean War changed everything. The US intervened to protect Taiwan, incorporating it into its Cold War strategy against communism. For decades, Taiwan remained an authoritarian state under the Kuomintang, heavily dependent on American military and financial support. But in the 1970s, the world began to recognize Mao's China as the legitimate government of China. In 1971, the United Nations transferred China's seat from Taiwan to Beijing. Then, in 1979, the US formally recognized the People's Republic of China and severed official ties with Taiwan. This was a turning point for Taiwan. With its political future uncertain, it turned to economic survival. It focused on developing industries like textiles and petrochemicals, and later, high-tech manufacturing. By the 1980s, Taiwan had transformed into an economic powerhouse, becoming one of the Asian tigers, alongside South Korea, Singapore, and Hong Kong. The game changer came in 1987 when Taiwanese-American engineer Morris Chang founded TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. This company revolutionized the global semiconductor industry, producing advanced microchips that power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. Today, TSMC controls 50% of the world's semiconductor market and 95% of advanced chip production. Taiwan's dominance in semiconductors has made it both an economic powerhouse and a geopolitical flashpoint. Any disruption to Taiwan's chip industry would cripple the global tech economy. And so, we arrive at the present. China sees Taiwan as a historical part of its territory that must be reunited. The US sees Taiwan as a critical ally in countering China's rise. The world, meanwhile, watches nervously, knowing that a single miscalculation could lead to a global conflict. Will the Pacific remain peaceful? Or will Taiwan be the spark for World War III? Only time will tell. Taiwan has managed to make itself indispensable to the world through its technological advancements, entangling global economies in its survival. But politically, Taiwan has taken a definitive stance. It sees itself as an independent nation, unwilling to return to China's control after years of authoritarian rule. This infuriates China. In 1996, as Taiwan prepared for its first fully democratic presidential elections, China launched missile tests near the island's shores to intimidate voters. This move backfired, as the US responded with the largest military show of force in the region since the Vietnam War, sending aircraft carriers to the Taiwan Strait. From then on, military drills and threats of invasion have been a regular occurrence. But despite all this, Taiwan's economy has continued to grow, thanks to its dominance in semiconductor manufacturing. Today, Taiwan produces the world's most advanced chips, making it essential for every major technology company, from Apple to Nvidia. However, China has changed its strategy. Instead of outright war, it is attempting to make Taiwan economically dependent on Beijing, similar to what it did with Hong Kong. The idea was to integrate Taiwan into China's economy so deeply that any attempt at independence would be economic suicide. But the Taiwanese people saw through this strategy. Pro-democracy movements like the Sunflower Movement in 2014 protested against trade deals with China, fearing that economic ties would be a gateway to political control. Then, when Hong Kong lost its autonomy under China's harsh crackdown, Taiwanese citizens became even more convinced that aligning with Beijing was a mistake. The situation now is more tense than ever. China's President Xi Jinping has vowed to reunify Taiwan with the mainland, seeing it as part of his vision for a Great China. He has set a deadline for this goal, 2049, the centennial of the founding of the People's Republic of China. But will China wait until 2049? Many fear that a crisis could come much sooner. With Donald Trump potentially returning to office, tensions are set to rise. Trump has been vocal about his hostility toward China, threatening massive tariffs and economic restrictions. But at the same time, he has criticized Taiwan's dominance in semiconductor production, questioning why America should protect a country that controls the technology essential to its own economy. No one knows what will happen. Will the US and China find a way to coexist peacefully, or will Taiwan become the flashpoint for a catastrophic war? The frightening reality is that the world's entire tech industry, and much of its economy, depends on a tiny island that China is determined to reclaim and the US is determined to protect. If a conflict erupts, it wouldn't just be a local war, it could throw the global economy into chaos. As it stands, Taiwan's fate remains uncertain. It is caught between two superpowers, both of whom need it but neither of whom fully control it. For centuries, Taiwan has been known by another name, Formosa, meaning beautiful island. And perhaps, just as in the past, its beauty and strategic value will continue to draw the eyes of global powers, making it a central piece in the puzzle of world domination. Maybe, just maybe, World War III won't start in Europe or Russia, as many expect. Perhaps it will begin in a small island in the Pacific, a place that most of the world only knows from a label on the back of their electronic devices, made in Taiwan. If Taiwan ever triggers the end of the world, the screens we watch it on will likely be powered by Taiwanese-made chips.